I'm Richard Taylor from the Philosophy Department at Marquette University and the de Wolf-Monsignor Center at the Catholic University of Leuven. And I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to present this paper in Paris, long distance from Milwaukee. My paper title is Rationality in the Theology and Philosophy of Ibn Rushd. Since time is limited, I will get right to my presentation. First, the introduction. For this short presentation, my focus is on how rationality manifests itself in the methodologies of Ibn Rushd in works of religion and works of philosophy. My purpose in particular is to address the issue of the analysis of the thought of Ibn Rushd and the question of how his works are to be read. For those of us who study his various writings, one important issue is whether his works should be read as all equally reflecting his mind and views in the same way. That is, if we wish to study his thought on providence, for example, can we draw equally upon his works such as his Tafsir on the Metaphysics of Aristotle, his Tahafut, and his Al-Kashf, to construct his authentic worldview on this issue? Can we draw on these for understanding of the issues of the nature of creation, the eternity of the world, determinism, the afterlife, and other important issues which are subjects of concern in both religion and philosophy or science? Or does he have different worldviews which are methodically distinct? Further, if they are distinct, what are their relations to one another? In what follows, I first consider the issue of method in the Fasl Maqal, then proceed to important remarks on method in the Tahafut, and finally to the opening remarks in Al-Kashf an Manahij al-Adillah fil Aqaid al-Millah. In each of these works we can see Ibn Rushd's Aristotelian philosophical methodology at work, and yet these writings are all suitably classified as dialectical works of religion, though the Fasl Maqal also has a special claim to being a philosophical work in a certain sense which I will explain. I begin with the work Kitab Fasl Maqal wa Taqrir ma bayna ash-Sharia wal Hikmah min al-Ittisal, which I render into English in a rather distinctive way as, quote, the book of the distinction of discourse and the establishment of the relation of religious law and philosophy, close quote. This is incontestably a work of religion, since the determination of whether philosophy and logic are permitted, prohibited, or commanded as obligatory is declared by Ibn Rushd to be according to religious consideration, al-jihati al-nadari al-shari. So there's no question, it is a treatise on religion. Still, in the considerations that follow, Ibn Rushd quickly moves the discussion into a philosophical framework, transforming Quranic terms into corresponding, albeit subtly different, philosophical meanings. A scriptural command to reflect on what sight provides becomes a command to carry out the activity of philosophy in the study of beings with reflection on beings as revelatory of their artisan. And religious analogical reasoning, or qiyas, becomes al-qiyas al-aqli, syllogistic reasoning, to yield the conclusion that what religious law calls for and urges is the most complete kind of consideration by means of the most complete kind of qiyas, and is called demonstration, burhan. Hence, philosophy should be deemed to be obligatory under Sharia. However, its use needs to be restrained and restricted to those who have requisite abilities with demonstrative philosophy. For assent by means of the methods of demonstration results in knowledge per se and not per aliud. Others with such abilities and training assent to statements and propositions not per se. Others without such abilities and training assent to statements and propositions not per se, but through rhetoric and emotion, or through dialectical reasoning, neither of which methods lead to truth, with the necessity of demonstration. It should be noted here, however, that the distinctions made are two. First, the distinction between the three sorts of assent, and secondly, a distinction between what is apprehended per se and what is apprehended per accidens or per aliud. Still, thus far the reasoning of the fossil Macaul remains religious, in spite of the twists and turns of meanings of vocabulary into philosophical terminology. The criteria for the approval of philosophical methods inside religion is grounded in religious statements or premises. Nevertheless, nothing in the religious framework has prohibited the possibility of two truths, one of religion and one of philosophy. The fossil Macaul, however, also functions on a deeper level as a treatise on interpretation grounded in an Aristotelian syllogistic method and an Aristotelian metaphysics of truth. Quote, "Since this Sharia is true and calls to the study leading to the knowledge of the truth, we, the Muslim community, know firmly that demonstrative study does not lead to differing with what is set down in the Sharia. For truth does not contradict truth, but rather is consistent with it and bears witness to it." Close quote. That's from the fossil Macaul. As author of a religious study in the fossil Macaul, Ibn Rushd here explicitly draws on the common religious belief that the Sharia is true and his now established view that the use of demonstrative methods inside religious discourse does not lead to contradiction. At its surface, the work, or in its external part at any rate, it remains religious in character. However, at a deeper level, the work here becomes a philosophical treatise on interpretation, to be shared only with those with suitable philosophical training. This is so because, as I've shown elsewhere, Ibn Rushd surreptitiously and intentionally here employs a quotation from Aristotle, Prior Analytics, Book 1, Chapter 32, a work on which he has also written a commentary. The underlying treatise on interpretation is grounded in Aristotelian philosophy and holds for a priority of philosophical understanding of reality over that of other methods due to its methodology of syllogistics and particular demonstrative syllogism. At the surface of the text, Ibn Rushd makes similar claims, but only in the religious context of faith-based principles. This is clear when he writes the following, quote, "Those faithful not adept in science are people whose faith in them is not based on demonstration. So if this faith by which God has described the learned is particular to them, then it is obligatory that it come about by means of demonstration. If it is by means of demonstration, then it comes about only along with the sciences of interpretation. For God has already announced that there is an interpretation of them that is the truth, and demonstration is only of the truth." Hence, in the fossil Macaul, for religious readers without philosophical skills, the principles of argumentation remain the external beliefs and understandings. Yet on another level at which the reasoning has a principle of Aristotelian philosophy at its key point, the author of the work knows that it is also part of an Aristotelian argument outlining the foundational value of syllogistic and demonstration in an Aristotelian metaphysics of truth. In light of this, it's important to recall the distinction indicated earlier between the three sorts of assent to religious propositions or statements, and a distinction between what is apprehended per se and what is apprehended per accidens or per aliud. Now, the second of the two proves to be the more important to the argumentation. Religious reasoning that remains focused on what might be called the external understanding of religious teachings is based on principles apprehended per accidens or per aliud, from faith or belief in tradition. In contrast, ideal philosophy is founded on principles apprehended naturally and known per se through demonstrations that are available to the highly learned to understand the meaning of truths of religion in an internal way and in accord with the fullness of reality itself. That the foundational methodological distinction at work in the thought of Ibn Rushd is that of the external religious from the internal philosophical is witnessed in a well-known statement in the Tahafut, which he describes as a persuasive work, that is, a religious dialectical work which presumes religious principles and propositions as starting points for its argumentation. He writes there, quote, "All this is the theory of the philosophers on this problem, and in the way we have stated it here, with its proofs, it is a persuasive, not a demonstrative statement. It is for you to inquire about these questions in the places where they are treated in the books of demonstration." Close quote. That this distinction between dialectical and demonstrative, is key to the thought of Ibn Rushd is also witnessed even more directly in a comment on method at the beginning of his Al-Kashf, a religious work of dialectical theology intended to be a public explanation of external teachings accessible enough for the unlearned. There he writes the following, quote, "In a separate treatise, we have already dealt with the harmony of philosophy and religion, indicating how religion commands the study of philosophy." So, of course, he's referring here to the Fasl Maqal. "We maintain there that religion consists of two parts, external and interpreted, and that the external part is incumbent on the masses, whereas the interpreted is incumbent on the learned. With respect to that part, it is the duty of the masses to take it at its face value, without attempting to interpret it. As for the learned, it is not permissible to divulge their interpretations to the public." Close quote. While it would be very valuable to analyze the many Aristotelian arguments provided by Ibn Rushd against what he deems to be weak dialectical theology in Al-Kashf, that's beyond the limits of this presentation and will await another opportunity. Nevertheless, my key point here is that he explains that the primary division to be found in the Fasl Maqal is that between the external religious and the more sophisticated internal religious viewpoint or stance, that is the stance that is primarily philosophical, that is held by those who are of greater intellectual ability and have demonstrative philosophical talents. The conclusions I reach on the basis of these considerations are the following. Number one, Ibn Rushd has two distinct methodological approaches to topics treated in religion and philosophy. For religion, the method to be used is that appropriate for religious discourse, namely that found in discourses of dialectic and rhetoric, for which certain key religious principles regarding the subject matter are proposed and accepted as proper starting points in the persuasive presentation of reasoning regarding religious matters. Given the foundational principles for religious reasoning of these two sorts of discourses, the dialectical and the rhetorical, the strength of these conclusions rests not only on the cogency of the religious reasoning, but also on the distinctive sort of assent to the foundational religious principles. In contrast, the method of demonstration set out by Aristotle in the Posterior Analytics is the primary method to be followed in the formation of truths, since properly formed true premises and valid argument form in demonstration lead to truths which come to be known as such in the process of demonstration. This approach to this division is found in several works of Al-Farabi, among them his Tahsil Sa'ada, the attainment of happiness. Though Ibn Rushd follows Al-Farabi in the distinction of the religious rational discourse and philosophical rational discourse, and in awarding primacy to philosophy, he does not explicitly emphasize the notion that religion is a similitude in the likeness of philosophy on the level of political and social philosophy, or society, in the same way as Al-Farabi does. The reasons for this difference are perhaps worthy of some discussion another time. Number two, this approach that I've come to here, this means that with regard to issues which concern subject matter of interest to both religion and philosophy or science, we cannot soundly construct the authentic worldview of Ibn Rushd by treating all his works equally on particular issues, as some modern interpreters of Ibn Rushd have tried to do. For each work, the audience and the purpose of the work must be taken into account, and it must be determined whether the work under consideration is 1. Philosophical and scientific, and so internal, or 2, external, religious, and dialectical, or rhetorical in character. 3. In particular cases of conflict between the conclusions of external religious reasoning and properly applied philosophical reasoning on matters relevant to religion, as, for example, in the case of reasoning about the nature of creation, providence, determinism, eternity of the world, and the like, reason requires that the conclusions of philosophy and science take first place for their internal penetration of the issues. In that situation, alternative external interpretations of religious teachings consonant with philosophy and science must be devised in a way suitable for the public only. There can be only one truth regarding these matters for Ibn Rushd, and the possibility of double truths, one for religion and one for philosophy, is explicitly excluded, of course. Nevertheless, these have to be portrayed in different ways to these different groups. And my final conclusion here, number 4, I've argued elsewhere that in Ibn Rushd's major philosophical works there are no grounds for an ontology of an afterlife for the human being or human soul. I've also argued that his philosophical approach does not have provision for divine knowledge of anything outside the divine essence itself. I have also followed his reasoning that there is no particular providence for or divine intentionality toward particulars of this world. Further, in an analysis of creation, which he describes using the term iktira, I've also noted elsewhere his rejection of ibda, or creation ex nihilo, in favor of an eternal ontological dependence of all things on God as the transcendent, formal, and final cause of all reality, but not a direct, efficient cause. And further, I've noted that in his tafsir on the metaphysics of Aristotle, he asserts that the most perfect form of worship of God is in the science of metaphysics. And the pursuit of this is a sharia, or religious duty, specific to the philosophers, a sharia al-khasa bil-hukamat. In each of these cases, for Ibn Rushd, philosophy provides a deeper internal understanding of the issues at stake. In these cases, common external religious interpretations are left behind, and deeper insights are set out through philosophy. And yet these conclusions seem hardly acceptable in religion. Here we see the views which Ibn Rushd reaches in his philosophy after reasoning to the priority of philosophy prove ultimately to be severely difficult to reconcile with traditional Islamic beliefs on a number of matters. When combined with these strongly reasoned philosophical views argued in psychology, natural science, and metaphysics by Ibn Rushd, that is, in philosophical sciences where he foremost locates truth, the result is that Ibn Rushd reveals himself to have a unique worldview with a very idiosyncratic conception of Islam, the religion to which he consistently adhered closely throughout his entire lifetime. This, of course, leaves many issues to be discussed, and perhaps we can do that in the short time that remains. So I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to share these thoughts from the other side of the Atlantic. Thanks very much.